I've been hearing a lot of bullshit questioning the US's involvement and commitments to NATO. You know, because Putin doesn't like NATO for obvious reasons, and Trump is a Putin puppet, and Trump's followers are, well, in a cult. So Trump and his mindless minions have been going on and on about how the United States should pull out of NATO, and Trump even said that Russia should be able to do whatever they want with NATO countries that don't, pay their fair share. And people who believe that are, stupid. So I figured it's time to talk about what exactly is NATO and why those people are wrong. Dangerously wrong. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's basically just an alliance of now 34 countries in the North Atlantic. This involves most of Western European countries, the United States, and Canada. And it was formed in 1949 while the world was still reeling from the aftermath of 2 world wars. And the idea was to have an alliance so strong that it would prevent any future world wars between Western powers. And it's been relatively successful. We're creeping up on World War III, but we haven't had another world war since 1945. And the key part of this alliance is that an attack on any NATO country is to be treated as an attack on all NATO countries. So if Iran, for example, was to attack France, it would be like Iran attacked us, and we would all go to war. And this is important because it puts a lot more muscle and munitions behind any country in the alliance. And the idea is it would prevent that domino effect of a stronger adversary taking over countries individually. Like what Germany did in 1939, where it took Poland in the Blitzkrieg and then blew through half of Europe before any of the countries decided that they were going to get involved and enforce the Treaty of Versailles and fight back against Germany. And without question, since its inception in 1949, the main focus of NATO has been to prevent the USSR and now Russia from expanding into other European countries. And this has been super effective because it limits how far Russia can push the envelope, because Russia would love to go take back Poland. But Poland is a NATO country, so if Russia invades Poland, that would be the exact same thing as declaring war on the United States and Germany and France and 34 other countries. And as much as Russia loves fucking around, that is a level of find out they're not willing to play with. At least not yet. But all that said, how does NATO function, and how is the United States treated unfairly as its cornerstone member? Well, NATO is funded in 2 ways, and the first is called a common fund. And these are actually 3 funds that provide the logistical resources for NATO to function. It costs about $4.5 billion every year, and there's a simple formula based on each member country's economy as to how much they have to contribute to that total fund. The United States and Germany by far contribute the most, about 16% apiece, and every other country falls somewhere under that, depending on how big they are. And you've got to remember that the United States is the largest country in the alliance, both economically and population-wise. So yeah, we pay the most. Obviously, it's like we're the rich person who has to pay the most in taxes to make that society function, except it kind of falls apart because it's the poor people in our country that pay the most in taxes because our rich people don't actually pay taxes. But economically speaking, as a country, we're the richest country and we pay the most. And again, it's $4.5 billion total. We pay 16% of that. That is Washington couch cushion change. And then the other way that NATO is funded isn't really NATO being funded at all. NATO doesn't have its own army or anything like that. It's just each one of these individual countries' own defenses. Just their own military spending, and that's how we gauge, how much they're contributing to NATO. And in this case, back in 2014, all the NATO countries kind of agreed to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. And for a long time, almost none of the countries hit that, except for America. Fuck yeah, because that's the only thing we spend money on. Most of our citizens can't get healthcare or education, but we are really good at blowing shit up. Our healthcare system, worst in the world, but our anti-healthcare system is on point. The United States spends roughly 3.5% of its GDP on defense. However, in recent years, with Russia feeling more frisky, a lot of other NATO nations have been upping that percentage, and now over 2/3 of the NATO countries are hitting their defense spending targets. But even with those countries starting to hit their targets, the United States still and always has spent far more on NATO than anybody else. So in a way, we are actually investing more in other nations' defenses than they are investing in their own defense, and that's unfair, right? And aside from the irony of the people who say this kind of shit being the same people who say, life isn't fair anytime people fight for equality and justice, it still ends up being a pretty advantageous deal for us for a multitude of reasons. First off, preventing world wars is generally a good thing for, the world, and we happen to be part of the world. The other thing is that the people who end up being our biggest adversaries, China, North Korea, Russia, we have some separation between all of these nations. And that's good, right? Because we all know how much it sucks to live next to a shitty neighbor who's always lighting off fireworks at all hours of the night and testing cruise missiles and mortars and shit. But you also know how the old saying goes, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And when your enemies are on the other side of the world, that gets hard to do. Unless, of course, you have a NATO. Because that means you've got friends that live next to that shitty neighbor. And because they're your friends, they let you come over to your house and Wilson over the fence to see what that shitty neighbor is doing. They let you store your shit in their garage, like, a couple spare F-35s and a B-52 and some Abrams tanks. And because they're your friends and they live next to that unpredictable and shitty neighbor, they buy stuff from you, like a couple spare F-35s and Abrams tanks. Maybe a Javelin or two, which is awesome, right? Because they're giving us money while also making themselves more prickly to the people we don't like. And that's why defense spending a little bit starts to be a somewhat unfair comparison there, because like when we spend money on defense, we're spending it on ourselves, like inside America with American firms building American equipment. But when other countries spend money on defense, a lot of times they're spending that money on us as well. That money's leaving their country and coming to us because, there's only so many countries on the planet that build fighter jets and shit. Sure, we don't have healthcare, but we've got fighter planes that can single-handedly level small countries and nobody knew what hit them. So the United States gets a lot more fringe benefits, you could say, from our NATO allies in that sense that aren't exactly put up on paper as the common fund or the percent of defense spending that, we all spend. So ultimately, sure, the United States spends a little bit more on NATO than everybody else, but we get a lot of benefit from it because we get to project our military power right to our adversaries' doorsteps. And logistically, should the need ever arise, we're ready to fight a war on their front door tonight. And that's a good thing because we're ready to fight them where they are. That means that they've got a lot more ground to cover to try to fight us where we are. And that's a good thing if you're an American, right? Because if war ever breaks out with Russia, I think we'd all much rather be fighting it there than here. I also want to point out that the only time that Article 5 of NATO, the clause that says if one's attacked, we're all attacked and we got to go to war, was us. We're the only people who've ever invoked Article 5. And we did that when we decided we needed to go to war with Afghanistan because Saudi Arabia funded a dude in Pakistan to organize people flying planes into a building in New York. So even if they're not investing as much financially as we'd like, they have spent 20 years at a war that was pretty pointless, for us. So just saying, we might want to pipe down just a tad. Now, ultimately, here's the point, is NATO's strength comes from the United States' commitment to it. Because we've got the biggest sticks and we rely on our NATO allies to allow us to put those sticks where they're the most effective. And the United States being allowed to put its big sticks where they're most effective protects the United States' interests economically around the world, which right there is already a way bigger return on our investment than we could ever spend on NATO. Just being able to strategically put our toys where we can rattle the most cages and being able to keep trade and information flowing all the places we say we want trade and information to flow, or not flowing in the form of sanctions and blockades if we don't want it going that way. It's tough to put a price on that, but what we're spending is definitely not too much. And we're only able to do that because our other NATO countries help us out with that. And then NATO's strength from our commitment to it deters our adversaries like Russia, China, and North Korea from doing Russia, China, and North Korea shit. There's a reason that Russia desperately did not want Ukraine to join NATO and why they're trying so hard to win this war before we say, okay, you can come in. And there's a reason that at this point, Russia invaded Ukraine and not Poland. Now, to be fair, after seeing how incompetent Russia is at war in Ukraine, Poland would probably be fine on their own. They are a very prickly porcupine. But still, invading Poland is how you end up with world wars, and we'd like to avoid that, and that's the whole purpose of NATO. And if we've got to spend a little bit more than some other countries to prevent that, that's still a really goddamn good return on our fucking investments. And I'd say it's still pretty fucking fair considering those are the countries on the front line that'll get sprayed with shit if it ever hits the fan. And questioning that alliance and our commitment to it does nothing but embolden Putin and increase global instability and brings us closer to war. Questioning that alliance is paramount to treason, which I get it. Committing treason's just another Tuesday for Trump and his treason tribe of followers. But for the rest of us, unless you hate America, you need to be supporting NATO. And trying to question or weaken an alliance that has kept our country and our allies safe for decades, that's pretty fucking unpatriotic.